there, I'm Angela. Welcome to the channel, or welcome back. Today we're going to do something kind of fun here on the channel. We're going to do the sewing version of that game, This or That. It's where we get presented with two options on how we see things or do things and have to share which one of those applies to ourselves. If you're ready, let's get going. So before we jump in, I just want to mention that the sewing edition of This or That was kind of started by Julie over at the Curated Curvy. I'll leave a link to her channel below. Go and check her out. And I was tagged by Karen over at KGFL Creations. I'll also link her channel below. If you guys don't watch Karen, go check her out. I love her channel. She's kind of, I guess, newer maybe, but she kind of just recently come into my radar, and I love her channel. Go check her out. So with that, let's jump in. There's 4 broader categories, and then each one has a number of questions within. So I've got my notes here. If I'm looking down, that's what I'm looking at. Let's do it. So the first category is sewing prep. First question is buying new or shopping your stash. So if you follow my channel at all this year, you probably know that I'm shopping my stash. I love buying new fabric, and that's how I ended up with such a large stash. So I would have to go, at least for me presently at this time, definitely shopping my stash. The second question is PDF versus paper patterns, and I'm a little bit torn on this one too. So I am just now starting to, like in the past year and a half, starting to use PDF patterns more and more. And I'm kind of embracing the whole process of printing them out, taping together, and then cutting them out. I'm looking at it as a fun process, where previously I was like, no, that sounds like too much extra work in the whole process, but I'm kind of enjoying it. Although if I had to pick just one, I think like if I could only get patterns one way going forward, I would probably prefer them to come to me already printed on the tissue paper. Third question is cutting versus tracing. And again, this kind of depends. So if I am printing out a PDF pattern, I'm just printing out that one size typically. So I'm just going to cut it out directly. But when I'm using a pre-printed tissue paper pattern, it still kind of depends. So if I know that this is probably going to be like a one and done outfit, like a nicer dress that I can't see myself ever making again, I might just go ahead and cut out the tissue. And if it's something like maybe a t-shirt or a pair of pants that I might see myself wanting to make over and over, I will go ahead and trace. That way I'll preserve all the sizes, because like many of us, my weight fluctuates up and down as time goes on. Not as much down as I would like, but that's okay. Tracing does add quite a significant amount of time to the process, I have to say. And sometimes I kind of weigh it with, if it's a big 4 pattern that goes on sale for $1.99, at least here in the US with some regularity, I might just go ahead and cut it out. And then if I think I might make it again, I'll just buy it again. If I had like great success with it, the next time that particular brand is on sale, I'll pick up a second copy. So I've been known to do that. The fourth question is muslin versus just go for it. Increasingly, I am on team just go for it. There's a couple of exceptions. So let me back up a little bit. When I first started getting back into garment sewing a few years ago, it was probably maybe late 2019. I hadn't sewn garments in many years. I had been into quilting for a long while. So I was doing muslins, and it just seemed like kind of wasteful. I was using actual muslin fabric, which is cheap generally, but it's still kind of wasteful. Even if I could reuse some of those pieces in a different pattern, I always felt really bad about, now what am I going to do with this? And as my fitting skills have increased through like study and effort over the last couple of years, increasingly I'm more of just go for it. And overall, I have to say it kind of has worked out. The second category is fabrics, and the first question is in-store versus online fabric shopping. If I had my preference, and if in like the perfect world, I would have a couple of really good physical brick and mortar fabric stores close to me, and I would probably only go in-store shopping. just so that I can see all the colors, touch the fabric, see how it drapes, what the hand is. Like that's perfect best case scenario for me at least. But since that is not the case, and I do have a couple of Joann's locations that are pretty close to me, and I'll get fabric there occasionally, but sometimes the quality is not great, or they just might not have like a color or a type of fabric that I'm looking for. I do find myself buying online more frequently than in store. And kind of you do take a chance sometimes with that. They don't always, like the pieces don't always live up to what the listing showed them to be. But what I do love is some stores will offer samples. You can buy like maybe a 3-inch or 4 or 5-inch swatch. And I take advantage of that when I can. And I would say that with a few duds, overall, my online shopping experiences have been pretty good. I'll put links below to the online stores where I shop or have shopped most frequently. I'll put those below. I'm not doing as much this year because it's my stash busting year, stash Sewdown 2023. But I do love these fabric stores that I'm going to give you links to. The second question is knits versus wovens. So this is kind of a conundrum. I wear knits predominantly, but I love sewing with wovens much better. And I am still kind of building my skills on sewing with knits because previously, prior to my comeback to garment sewing, I hadn't sewn with knits much at all, a handful of times, decades ago. And now I'm trying to incorporate knits into my sewing practice more and more because you're never going to learn how to do it right if you don't practice, right? So it's going pretty well, I have to say. And it's still on my goals for this year to get a serger. And I feel like once I do that, it'll kind of maybe change the game for me as far as sewing knits. But I still think I'm always going to love sewing with wovens best. They seem like they behave better, or just with having the structure to them, they press better. We'll see. Maybe that'll change the more knits that I sew with. The third question is tumble dry versus hang dry. So I have kind of a two-part answer for this. When I first get a fabric, or at least at some point before I start cutting and sewing with it, I pre-wash and put it through the dryer for most things. I may not do that if I had like a really expensive fabric or fancy. I might handle it a little bit differently, but by and large, with almost everything, I run it through a gentle wash warm, and then I throw it in the dryer on tumble dry, low heat. So it kind of like if there's any issues with dyes coming out of the fabric and shrinkage, I get that out of the way right up front. I'm pretty much a die-hard pre-wash and pre-dry sewist. I do that with both garment fabrics and quilting fabrics. Now, once the garment's made, I still will almost always run it through the machine wash gentle, but then I might hang it to dry just so that that garment is not getting like that constant wear and tear on it. Fourth question is rotary cutter versus scissors. Again, two-part answer. If we're talking garment sewing, I'm still a pins and scissors girl. I have tried rotary cutting with regular garment pattern pieces, and I can't seem to do it very well. When I'm quilting, of course, I use the rotary cutter. Unless it's an applique piece, I always use my rotary cutter. And with that, though, you have the ruler, so you can like hold your ruler steady and run the blade down the side of the ruler, and it's almost no fail, if you have done it enough times and you're good at it. But I can't seem to get the knack of like running that rotary cutter around curvy pieces unless I were to go incredibly slow. And if I'm going to go that slow, then I might as well just pins and scissors it. Of course, kind of like with sewing with knits, if I don't practice using the rotary cutter, I'm not going to get better. So maybe I'll give that more of a try. Third category is clothing construction, and the first question is following instructions versus just winging it. I generally follow the instructions unless I'm making like a design change to the pattern, of course, and or if there's anything that's confusing about the pattern, I might just go ahead and just do my own thing. If it's something that I can figure out and the pattern is making it worse, I'll go ahead and just wing it. Or if it's something really easy, I'll kind of glance through the pattern and then I feel comfortable like just winging it. Maybe for like a t-shirt or something like that, then I might not have the need for the pattern. Second question is bias tape versus facings. Hands down, bias tape. I've said it before on the channel and I have to say it again. I strongly dislike facings. Like I almost like hate facings with maybe a couple of exceptions depending on the garment. By and large though, I'd rather just use bias tape. Even if that means like along the edges I'll have like a top stitch like seam line or what have you, it's still worth it to me. Even though when I have sewn with facings, I have done the understitching and tacked down at any seam lines, they just seem to be unruly. Like I can't get them to lay flat. They're not fun to sew. They're not fun to wear. I kind of envy those of you guys who have such good luck with facings. That is definitely not me. And in this case, it's not a case of I haven't practiced enough. I've done like many facings, like from a long time ago up through present day sewing, and I just can't deal. Third question is serged seams versus French seams. This is an easy one for me. I don't have a serger and I've only done French seams on one garment to my knowledge. Unless it was something many years ago that I did a French seam on. I only recall like one garment where I did a French seam. I love the way it looked inside and turned out. It was a little bit of extra work, but by and large, I just prefer a regular seam and I'll overcast the raw edges. If it's a knit fabric, like a jersey knit or something, oftentimes I'll just leave the edges unfinished. And I know that'll change once I get a serger, but for now, that's how I do it. Fourth question is button fly versus zip fly. And kind of like the previous question, I don't feel as qualified to have a good answer for this one. I've only done one garment that has like a fly front, and that's the glissando skirt that I just finished. I'll be showing that to you guys this weekend if you're interested in how it came out. That one did have a button fly. You could have converted it to a zip fly. There's hacks for that. But I wanted to go ahead and just do the buttons just to get practice using the buttonholer on my newer machine here. And I have to say that if I ever make another garment with like a fly front again, I'm going to go with a zipper. Definitely for sure. 5 is buttons by hand or buttons by machine. I typically sew my buttons on by hand. If they're the kind of button that has the shank to it, the only way I know of to sew them on is by hand. If they're more of like the flat button with the 2 or the 4 holes, I have done those on machine before, and I would consider doing them by machine again, but to me, sometimes it's easier just to do it by hand. And I kind of am of the mind that I enjoy a little hand sewing from time to time. I wouldn't want to make like a whole garment by hand. That's like maybe a little much for me at least. But I don't mind doing a little bit like hand sewing in a zipper or hand sewing buttons. I kind of find it enjoyable. I'll just put on something good to watch or listen to and just sew away. 6 is fusible interfacing versus sew-in interfacing. For my average everyday garment, fusible for sure. I will use sew-in interfacing depending on the fabric or the garment. If it's delicate fabric that I don't want the interfacing like stuck to, I'll go ahead and use sew-in. Trying to think what other times where I might choose sew-in interfacing. I feel like that might be the only time is if I don't want to risk damaging the fabric by ironing something to it. Might be it. 7 is snip as you go or all at once. I try to snip as I go, those little threads, just to get them out of the way. And oftentimes I'll forget. If I don't do it as I go, I forget to come back later and do it. But even though I do try to snip as I go, I always find at the end of a garment, I still have some threads hanging. I've even found like after I've worn a garment a couple of times, threads I forgot to snip. Anyway, try to do snip as I go. Similarly, question 8 is press as you go or all at once at the end. No questions here. It's as I go. I always press as I go. I feel like there's no other way to do this to get the best result from your garment or your quilt or whatever it is that you're making. And in some cases, if you don't press each step of the way, it could maybe interfere with how the next step, how they join together, and it might not work as well. So I feel like this one's not even an option. Last category is sewing habits. First question is late night versus daytime. I am a daytime sewer for sure, especially if I'm off work daytime. I will sew in the evenings, but I feel like that's kind of a third time slot there, daytime, evening, and late night. I am not a late night sewist at all. In my younger days, in my 20s, for sure I was. I had more energy. I could stay up later. My days, maybe I had a lot more going on or I was running around a lot more. So night times and into the evening maybe was the only time I could sew. Now I have a little more flexibility with my schedule, but I also can't stay up that late because I get too tired. So I would say more of just like an evening sewer, 6 o'clock, 7 p.m., unless I have the day off and then it's daytime. Second question is slow and steady versus frantic. Hands down, slow and steady. Nothing wrong with frantic sewing. And to all of you guys who are frantic sewers, you go. You get it done. And I am like just a little bit envious. I wish I could sew fast and get it done, but I'm just not. At one point, again, kind of like the late night sewing, there was a time when, but that time is long gone and I can't see this changing. Oh, maybe, but it's slow and steady for me. Third question is tidy as you go or one big cleanup. I try to tidy as I go, and of course, even tidying as I go, I still have to do a cleanup at the end, but it's not like a big cleanup. There's a little bit to do at the end. I try to, it's kind of like the way that I cook. I try to clean as I go when it's possible. There you have it. Those are my answers. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you guys strongly agree we're on the same page, or if there's something you were totally like, no way, I could never do it that way. I would love to have that conversation. It sounds like fun. And I'm going to go ahead and tag a couple of other sewing YouTubers to do this sewing edition challenge of this or that. At the time I put this together, these particular YouTubers had not done this type of video yet. So that might have changed by the time I get this posted. Anyway, I hope that you guys can participate. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you had fun getting to know more about me, and I hope to get to know more about you guys in the comments. And as I always like to say, the fact that we can share information and learn from each other is the best thing about having a channel. So I hope you'll tune back in this weekend when I'll be showing you my glissando skirt. And until then, bye!